everyone, welcome back for another deep dive. Today we're going to be tackling something pretty intense, flashbacks, and specifically how they're connected to complex PTSD. We're going to try to give you some tools that you can actually use, and thankfully we're joined by an expert who can help us with that.
Yeah, thanks for having me.
So we're joined by a psychoanalyst who has more than 15 years of experience, not just in researching, but actually working with people whose lives have been impacted by narcissistic abuse and developmental trauma, the kinds of things that often lead to complex PTSD. So welcome to the show. Really happy to have you here.
It's great to be here. I think this is something that we need to talk about more openly.
Yeah, definitely. One thing that I thought was interesting from the research is this idea that flashbacks, they're not just emotional, they're like really physical experiences. Like
Yeah.
our bodies get completely taken over and almost like we think we're back in danger, even if it was like years ago.
Yeah, it's like a total nervous system hijacking. It's not like you're failing to use logic or willpower or anything. It's more like your internal alarm system is just stuck,
Mm.
like a smoke detector that goes off if there's like a tiny puff of smoke. Your system is just reacting to anything it thinks is a threat, even if the actual danger is long gone.
Okay, so instead of us getting down on ourselves for having these huge reactions, we need to try to remember that it's our body trying to keep us safe, even if it's like misreading the situation.
Exactly. And the way our system misreads the situation, it can be, surprisingly complicated. You've probably heard of the fight, flight, freeze responses, right? But there's another one, and this one is often missed, especially with complex PTSD, and that's the fawn response.
This is where it gets really interesting, right? Because fawning can almost look like, like a healthy connection or something. It's a lot of people pleasing, trying too hard to keep everyone happy, even if it ends up hurting us.
And that's exactly why it's so dangerous. Like, if you use fawning in the moment, it might get you out of a conflict or calm an abuser down, but over time, it just reinforces this message that your needs don't matter and that you don't deserve to be heard.
Wow. I can see how that would play out in so many ways, especially if you've learned to put other people's needs ahead of your own.
Absolutely. And what's important is that all of these fight, flight, freeze, fawn, they can show up differently for different people. There isn't one way to have a flashback.
So how do we even start to figure out our own pattern? What are some signs they can be internal or external that might tell us a flashback is about to happen?
Well, that's where the 12-step approach we're going to be talking about can really help. The first step is figuring out your own personal triggers. And this source we have talks about a self-checklist that I think is so useful. And this isn't just about like vague feelings or whatever. It's about connecting specific things, sensations, thoughts, behaviors, to those times when you feel the most triggered.
So instead of being totally overwhelmed, like, oh, no, not again, we can start to see those little signs, those little warnings ahead of time.
Yes, exactly. So for example, feeling physically helpless, like you're actually being attacked even though you know you're safe. These aren't just like ideas, they're physical and emotional things that we can learn to spot. It's about becoming a detective of your own experience.
I love that analogy, becoming a detective of your own experience. Knowledge is power, right? The more we know about those early warning signs, the more power we have to respond in a way that helps us heal.
You got it. And that's where step 2 comes in. Immediately reassuring your inner child. And this isn't about pretending the trauma never happened. It's about showing compassion to that part of yourself that's still in that survival mode.
That makes sense. Because often with complex PTSD, you might feel guilty or ashamed, like, why can't I just get over this? But this approach, it's more like you're saying, hey, it's okay. That was really awful what you went through, and I'm here for you now.
Yes, exactly. And the source we're looking at today, it talks about this technique for building that compassion that's really simple, but it's powerful. It's called the butterfly tap.
Okay, gotta admit, I've never heard of that one. What is the butterfly tap?
So you cross your arms over your chest and you tap gently on each side of your body, back and forth. And this is a kind of bilateral stimulation that can calm down your nervous system. But the key here is that while you're tapping, you repeat these reassuring phrases to yourself, things like, "We are safe. I will protect you. I am here for you."
It's like you're giving yourself a hug from the inside out, creating that sense of safety and support that for a lot of us, especially with complex PTSD, we haven't had.
You got it, exactly. And the thing that I like so much about this technique is that it's simple. You can do it anytime, anywhere,
Right.
to calm those overwhelming feelings and ground yourself,
Mm.
whether you're in a flashback or just finished having one.
I love that. It's something you can actually do and so easy to remember, like a superpower you can use when you start feeling those overwhelming feelings.
It really is, yeah. And that brings us to what I find most encouraging, I think, about this whole 12-step approach. It gives you actual tools, not just the why behind flashbacks, but things you can try. And step 3 is a perfect example, building what they call a comfort toolbox.
That sounds so helpful, especially if you're someone who tends to get stuck in your head during a flashback. So how do we actually make this toolbox? What kind of stuff goes in it?
Think of it like collecting sensory experiences, things that bring you into the present moment. The source we're looking at, it really highlights something called anchor objects.
Anchor objects. Okay, what exactly is that? Give me the rundown.
Okay, picture this. You're holding a smooth, cool stone. You can feel the weight of it in your hand, and it's grounding you as you breathe in, and there's this smell of lavender coming from a diffuser nearby. Those are anchor objects working their magic. Could be a favorite scarf, soft texture, maybe a little bottle of essential oil, anything that uses your senses to ground you.
I have this tin of chai tea, amazing stuff, and I carry it everywhere I go. Just the smell of it makes me feel like instantly calmer and more present.
There you go.
Yeah.
You've already got a powerful anchor object. It's all about finding what works for you specifically, what helps your nervous system settle down, what brings you back to the here and now.
And it's not just about objects, though, right? I mean, the source we have, it also talks about actual grounding techniques. And I was blown away by how many different things you could try.
It really is like a whole toolbox, isn't it?
Yeah.
And I love how it acknowledges that there isn't a one-size-fits-all solution. Different things work for different people, and even for different types of flashbacks. Like, the source makes a distinction between stuff you can do for overstimulation, so that's like your fight or flight, versus what helps when you're understimulated, like when you freeze up or dissociate.
Okay, let's break those down. Starting with overstimulation. Let's say that wave of panic or anger, it hits. What can we do right then?
Deep breathing. It's classic for a reason. It's not just some cheesy advice. It actually regulates your heart rate and calms your system down. This source specifically talks about the 5-4-3-2-1 method. Ever heard of that one?
I have. It's where you name 5 things you see, then 4 things you can touch, 3 you can hear, like that, right?
You got it.
Mm.
You're basically taking that runaway train of thought and steering it back to the present moment using all your senses. Another awesome technique for overstimulation that's mentioned is guided imagery.
Oh, guided imagery is a lifesaver for my anxiety. It's like you can press pause on all those racing thoughts and just go somewhere calmer, more peaceful, even if it's just in your mind.
Yeah, creating your own internal retreat, exactly. Now, for the freeze response, that's when you feel frozen, stuck, can't think straight. You know what the source suggests? Might surprise you. Physical activity.
That does seem counterintuitive. When I'm frozen, moving is the last thing I want to do.
I know, right? It seems like the opposite of what your brain wants, but sometimes that's exactly what you need. Get your body moving, even just for a couple of minutes, and it can help snap you out of that frozen state. They even suggest something as simple as jumping jacks. Don't need any special equipment, no gym membership.
It's like giving that freeze response a good jolt of energy. I love that you can do it anywhere, too. What about those times where it's like, the sensations are just too much, total sensory overload?
The source suggests going for strong, maybe even a little jarring, scents or tastes. Something to bring you back to reality. They even give the example of durian candy. Have you ever?
Durian candy. I have to admit, that one made me laugh out loud when I read it. Definitely memorable.
Right. And that's the point. Finding that sensory experience, no matter how weird it might seem,
Yeah.
that cuts through everything else and brings you back to your body, back to the right now.
So we've got our anchor objects or grounding techniques. It's a lot of great stuff for our comfort toolbox. But what about, like, the thinking part of flashbacks? It's not just physical, right? Our thoughts can spiral out of control, too. What does this 12-steps thing say about dealing with that?
It's true. It's like the fear just takes the wheel and goes straight to the worst possible scenario every time. And that's where steps 5 and 6 come in. So step 5, it's all about what the source calls, get this, eternity thinking. That feeling like this will never end, things are always going to be this bad. Which, let's be honest, that kind of thinking just traps you in a cycle of fear and helplessness. So the source, it encourages you to really look at those thoughts, to see them for what they are, basically echoes of the trauma, and then gently remind yourself, this is temporary. It will pass.
It's like telling that scared part of yourself, okay, I hear you, but you're not running the show anymore.
Yes, exactly. And then step 6 goes along with that. Resisting the urge to catastrophize, which, let's be real, goes into overdrives during a flashback. It's so easy to start thinking, oh my God, I'm going to lose my job, my relationships, my mind. And the source we're looking at today, it actually gives you some pretty useful ways to interrupt those thoughts. Things like thought stopping. Have you heard of that?
I have. Isn't that where you're supposed to picture like a big stop sign when those bad thoughts start popping up?
Yep, that's the one. It sounds so simple, but it's really effective for interrupting that spiral. The real key, though, is to replace that self-attack with some self-compassion, which, after a flashback, I know it can feel almost impossible, especially with the shame and self-blame that can come up.
That's the part I struggle with. Like, I get it logically that it wasn't my fault. But those feelings, they just run so deep. How do we even start being kind to ourselves in those moments when all you want to do is beat yourself up?
It starts with acknowledging the pain. This source we have, it gives some phrases you can actually try, like, it's not your fault and you were just hurt, and like,
Hmm.
really let those words sink in. Imagine you were talking to a close friend who was going through the same thing. What would you say to them? Try talking to yourself with that same kindness.
Right. It's about realizing we deserve that same compassion, even if it doesn't come easily at first. Which, that's a journey in itself, right?
Right.
You don't just wake up one day and suddenly you're overflowing with self-love.
It really is a practice.
Yeah.
And like any practice, some days will be harder than others. But the more you can show yourself that gentleness and understanding, the stronger you'll become, the better you'll get at handling those tough emotions. And that actually brings us to something that's super important for healing from complex PTSD, but people don't always talk about it. And that's the importance of having support.
That's so true. Step 11 in this whole 12-step process, it really emphasizes getting that support from other people. But man, that can be so intimidating, especially when you're dealing with something as complicated as complex PTSD, which, let's face it, most people don't really understand.
You're preaching to the choir. And it doesn't automatically mean you have to jump into therapy, although that could be incredibly helpful.
Hmm.
But this source we have, it talks about finding those people in your life, people you trust, who can be there for you during and after a flashback.
You know, that's something I wanted to ask about because even trying to explain what a flashback feels like to someone who's never been through it, it's, I don't know, almost impossible.
It's like trying to describe a dream. Words just don't cut it,
Yeah.
you know? That's why this source we have, it talks about how important it is to educate the people you're close to teach them about flashbacks.
It's about giving them the tools to understand, right? So they
Yeah.
know how to show up for you in a way that's actually helpful. Because I think even with the best intentions, if someone doesn't get what's going on during a flashback, they could easily make things worse without meaning to.
Totally. It's about building that shared understanding so you can get through those tough moments together.
Yeah.
So we've talked about that initial response to a flashback, being kind to yourself, getting support.
Yeah.
But what about the long game? How does this 12-step thing approach long-term healing?
That's where it feels like things could fall apart, you know? It's like you can learn all these great coping strategies, but how do you actually heal from the things that are causing the flashbacks in the first place?
Well, that is where step 12 comes in, reflection after the flashback.
Right.
And this step is all about actually using the experience to grow, not just survive, to learn from it, to integrate it.
So instead of just wanting to forget it ever happened and move on as fast as possible, you're saying we should actually, like, sit with it.
In a way, yeah. The source suggests keeping a journal so you can keep track of your triggers, your feelings, what helps, what doesn't. It's about becoming, like we were saying before, a detective of your own experience. You're looking for patterns, for things that can help you heal and move forward.
I love that. Becoming a detective of your own experience, it's about taking back your power, don't you think? Because flashbacks, they can make you feel so powerless, so out of control.
100%. And that's what this whole 12-step approach is about, I think. It's about giving you the tools to become an active participant in your own healing. You can't erase the past, but you can decide how you're going to respond to it in the present.
And that's a process, right? Doesn't happen overnight.
Oh, absolutely not. Healing from complex PTSD, it's a marathon, not a sprint. There will be good days, bad days, setbacks, breakthroughs. The important thing is to be patient with yourself, celebrate the small wins, and remember, even on those days when it feels impossible, you are not alone.
That is such a powerful message and a perfect place to wrap up, I think. We covered a lot today, but I really hope our listeners are walking away with a little bit of hope, maybe even feeling a little more equipped to deal with complex PTSD.
I hope so too. Flashbacks, they can be incredibly isolating and make you feel totally overwhelmed. But please remember, you are not alone. And if you have the right tools, the right support, healing is possible.
Thank you so much for being here today, for sharing your expertise. It's been amazing. And to everyone listening, if you want to check out this 12-step approach, you can find a link to the source in our show notes. Take care of yourselves, and we'll catch you on the next deep dive.